I'm here with Secretary of Education Paul Reville. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tara, for having me here.
So what will you work to do to sustain Massachusetts, the #1 rating for education achievement?
Well, we're very proud. Governor Patrick has set a real standard here in Massachusetts, and we've maintained our leadership over the past 4 years in education. And as we look forward, we are just convinced we can't be satisfied with being #1 in the nation, because #1 in the nation isn't #1 in the world. And we still, even with our #1 rating, have a lot of students who are not enjoying the benefit of a high-quality education. So we won't rest until every child has access to a high-quality education. And when we look at our results, we see there are a number of subgroups in our population who just aren't doing as well as others. And so where we've learned how to get some children to proficiency in terms of key subjects, we now have to do it for all children, and all means all. So we're setting about that work and improving our standards and improving our assessment mechanisms, but most importantly, improving the quality of curriculum and instruction, improving the kind of teaching that happens in classrooms all across the Commonwealth, and then at the same time, making sure that we do whatever we can to intervene in any conditions that become impediments to children coming to school ready to learn.
How do you think Obama's Race to the Top initiative will affect the country?
Well, I think it's had a tremendous effect already, just in the way the government awarded a competitive grant for education reform and picked a handful of states and based it not only on their past performance and not only on their future expressed intentions, but also how they set up the conditions for success. So they gave us an incentive, for example, to pass dramatic achievement gap legislation in Massachusetts, the Achievement Gap Act of 2010, which we passed in January and the governor signed on Martin Luther King Day, was something that probably wouldn't have happened without the additional push of the Race to the Top application, even though it was work that we, as we always said, we needed to do, we were going to be doing anyway. It would have been harder to get it through the legislature. And that happened in state after state, including many states who didn't win the competition. So this is a whole lot of money, in the case of Massachusetts, $250 million. That's going to be applied directly to education reform purposes in local communities, strengthening teaching, working on turnaround schools, building better data systems to help teachers diagnose students' learning challenges more effectively. Going to make a big difference here in Massachusetts over the next 4 years.
You know, Massachusetts has such high testing scores, with SATs, ACTs,
Right.
But there are, reports for large, achievement and inspiration gaps.
That's right.
What changes do you think need to be made, in the classroom to inspire students at an early age?
Well, there are a lot of things that we have to do. I mean, one of them you just pointed out in your question. We need to start earlier. We need to differentiate our approach with respect to addressing the needs from as early as we possibly can of children who come to school with achievement gaps even when they walk into kindergarten. We have some children who come into kindergarten with 1/3 the vocabulary of their peers. That right from the beginning is an achievement gap. We can see by the time you hit grade 3 that, for example, low-income students do in general less well than their upper income peers. So we know there are some gaps that fall along the lines of socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status and educational achievement and attainment still correlate very closely in Massachusetts. So it's clear that there's some barriers that we need to eliminate. We need to strengthen the teaching in the early years. We need to strengthen teaching throughout. We need to build a stronger curriculum. We need to set our sights higher, which is why we adopted the Common Core national standards now that now are going to be Massachusetts standards, because they're more challenging, they're more rigorous, they're deeper and broader. We need to find new ways of measuring educational attainment and achievement that are more valid, that are more reliable, and give more data to teachers so that our assessment instrument does a more effective job of driving high quality instruction within classrooms. We need to provide more supports to students who are dealing with outside challenges by getting human and social service agencies and state government involved. We've created Child and Youth Development Cabinet that the Secretary of Health and Human Services and I co-chair, so that we can go after and address some of these problems. We've identified 35 underperforming schools that we're bound and determined to do everything we can to turn those schools around. So we're advancing on a number of fronts, but this is a major campaign. We are not content with our #1 rating. We won't be content until every child is prepared for success in the Commonwealth.
In regards to question 3, there's obviously concern with public schools and teacher cuts. If it is passed, what do you think can be done to recover and adjust in regards to budgeting?
Well, I mean, I think #1, we'll have to do a couple of things. We'll have to make dramatic cutbacks at the state level, and we have had over the past several years already to make dramatic cutbacks, cutting $2 or $3 billion a year off a $28 billion budget. And the governor has bent over backwards to try and prioritize education and has done so. So for 4 successive years, Governor Patrick has put forward a pro-education budget that sets record levels of spending in elementary and secondary education, despite cutting virtually everything else across the board in state government. If question 3 passes, there's just no question that state education funding can no longer be protected. So we will do less for local communities than we have done in the past. That in turn will put pressure on them at the local level to increase property taxes at the local level to make up the difference. It's either that or they're going to have to cut back on services, which means increase student-teacher ratios in classes, which means pass on fees for basic services like busing and athletics to students. People will really feel the impact in ways that I don't think people have experienced yet in the Commonwealth, but that will be the immediate consequence.